qualitative data analysis. As a reminder, qualitative methods really focus on understanding meaning and patterns that cut across experiences of individuals or events without looking at explicitly numerical data. So here we're looking at and analyzing or interpreting non-numerical observations of social life, and we're trying to understand underlying meaning, patterns, experiences, attitudes, and beliefs about a particular event or experience. We have both obtrusive methods where we're going in and interacting with individuals, or we could have some effect on the outcome or some effect on our participants. And then we also have unobtrusive methods, those in which we have zero or limited effect on our participants. In unobtrusive methods, we're really dealing with data that already exists. Someone went out and interviewed people in a certain culture, and then they brought those data back and provided them for other researchers, and now we're taking a look to analyze those data. Unobtrusive sorts of methods center on things like field notes, recordings, pictures. These things are transcribed or translated into text. From data collection to data analysis, we're focusing not only on what these people are saying, but how what they're saying relates to what other people are saying. We're looking for patterns across observations. When it comes to data analysis, you have a bunch of focal points. Interviews, you're really dealing with transcripts. You transcribe a recorded interview into text, and you're looking at those transcripts. You can also look at notes that you've created as an interviewer. You can be obtrusive, meaning you are the direct person taking the interview who created those notes, or you could be looking at the notes of others who have actually gathered the interview data. Ethnographies, you're analyzing notes about reactions or interactions with people, about your feelings, interpretations of someone living in or being in a certain space. And what we're really trying to do is analyze, quote unquote, the stuff of social context. What exists there? What are the sights, smells, tastes, sensations, feelings, beliefs that exists in these spaces? Participant observation, you're analyzing your notes about interactions with people, about how you feel in relation to a specific group or a culture. Participant observation, we have the ability to be more of a participant or more of an observer/researcher, and we have to make that decision. So when we go into the field, as an observer, you can be more of the note taker, but when you're a participant, you're not really sitting there with a clipboard taking notes. But what you want to do is take notes here and there, write a text to yourself, a note in your phone saying, this is how I felt at this point. If you're investigating an on-campus organization, you want to become more of a participant in that organization. Sometimes you don't have the time to stand to the side and write extensive notes. Maybe you're making quick notes about this is how I'm feeling as it's going on. Much like the interview, much like the ethnography, you're going to be analyzing the notes about these interactions. Content analysis, again, we're trying to understand meaning, and this is gleaned from text that exists already. So it can be obtrusive, unobtrusive. Oftentimes content analysis is unobtrusive, meaning that you're not actually interviewing the people, but it's something that they wrote down or something that they said in an interview that has been transcribed already. So you're going to be looking at newspapers, journals, blogs, tweets, and what you're trying to do is understand if there are patterns in what these people are saying. We have this idea of constant comparisons, and that is we take observations, whether they're direct or indirect, and we're comparing each observation with one another to develop what we call inductive grounded theory. So what we're doing is, instead of interviewing one person and then interviewing the second person, you're going back to the initial interview and comparing, okay, what did the second person say? How does that gel with or contend with what the first person said? And then move on to the third interview. So it's a very involved process, building grounded theory. Coding is a very important aspect of qualitative analysis. Coding is this idea that we're going to classify or categorize pieces of data. So you have an interview about protest participation. You interview one person, they said something about having friends that were going. So you code that part of that interview as them talking about social ties. You interview another person and they say, I didn't have friends who went, but I had classmates who went and that urged me to go. That is also aligned with this idea of social ties. So you code that bit of the interview as relating to social ties. So what we're doing is categorizing this bit of it as this category. This is why coding units are important. Are we going to look at the entirety of the interview? Are we going to look at notes, memos? Are we going to look line by line of the interview? Are we going to look minute by minute? So it's up to the researcher to decide, how are we going to code this whole interview? Are we going to say this is a positive interview, this is a negative interview? Or are we going to say, well, they were talking positively during this time and negatively during this time? It's sort of up to the researcher to figure out, are we going to code by the sentence structure? Are we going to code by the passage? Are we going to code by the paragraph? But as long as you can identify for other readers what the unit of analysis is, it's going to improve reproducibility. Open coding is this idea where you're doing an initial code of paragraphs based on text that are transcribed, and then you go back and reanalyze those results. And the reanalysis isn't to make sure that you're right so much as it is to see how it fits with subsequent interviews. You may interview one person, go back, transcribe the interview, and then you start analyzing that interview. You interview 3 more people and they're talking about something completely different, but you may see how that initial interview fits with these other 3 subsequent interviews. So it's really about seeing how the themes align with one another. This structure of research is really in depth. It takes a long time to do this kind of research. Here's an example. Somebody in a class was asked to give feedback to their professor in an open-ended survey. And this is what they said. Quote, "And I thought the professor should have given me at least partial credit for the homework that I turned in." So from this brief quote, we can start pulling out a bunch of different themes or topics. There's the topic of professor. There's the topic of student, right? The student is talking about the professor and what the professor should have done. Homework. I turned it in late, so it's tardiness. Talking about grades. Talking about perceptions of fairness and entitlement. We can pull out a variety of different themes from this not even full sentence. So it's important to realize this, because when we get to working with actual data, actual transcription, it may be very difficult for us to uniquely categorize bits of phrases. Even in this half sentence here, we see that we can categorize it as a bunch of different topics or themes. We're not going to say this sentence is only about professors, or only about students, or only about tardiness, because all of those are present in this sentence. Concept mapping is one way in which we can outline the concepts or topics or themes that we see in our text. It helps us identify relationships or interrelations between these concepts or themes or topics. So there's no one right way to analyze data. It's really up to the researcher to decide what is important for the question that I'm answering and what things should I focus on to tell that story. It's not so much cherry picking the data to identify the story that you want to, but it is the onus of that researcher to say, this is important and this is why. This is why it's really about relationships between students and professors and not really about tardiness in that previous example. We do have some examples here of qualitative data analysis programs. We have Atlas TI, Deduce, MaxQDA, and Google Forms. A lot of these are paid programs, so oftentimes you'll work with your department or your school or your college to see if you have access to these programs like Atlas TI, Deduce, and MaxQDA. I've included links here for you to get more information about these programs, how much they cost. Maybe you can get a license for them. Atlas TI, you see here, this is what it looks like. Atlas TI is really nice because you can just go through, highlight sections of your transcribed text, highlight them in certain colors and say, this is about this topic. You can overlay various highlights in a block of text. And when you do that, it creates this concept map at the top where you can say, this section was talking about this, which is related to this other topic, which is related to the other topic, which is also related to this other topic. Deduce is another version of this. Deduce is really nice because you can overlay sets of text, right? You're saying this block of text is pink, which is a certain theme. This block of text is this light blue color or gray color. You have a yellow section, green section, blue section. And these are all themes. While it doesn't provide the necessary concept map that Atlas TI does, instead it has provide information about how many times did you say that this theme was appearing. So you can get a quantitative breakdown of the qualitative data. So I don't cover MaxQDA here because I've never used MaxQDA, but my favorite is Google Forms. And within Google Drive, what you can do is take all your transcriptions from an interview or from a focus group or from whatever and put them into a spreadsheet, and then read that spreadsheet into your Google Form, such that you go to your Google Form, it'll bring up one paragraph or one response from one person. So rather than going through and highlighting, like in Deduce or Atlas TI, a whole paragraph, what you can do is say, hey, this whole paragraph represents a bunch of different things. It belongs to this blue characteristic. I'll give a check mark to the blue characteristic, a check mark to the yellow characteristic, check mark to the gray characteristic, and one to the pink characteristic. But note that I have an orange characteristic, a red characteristic, a dark blue characteristic, another purple characteristic, and none of those exist in this paragraph. So what we can do that way is just code all possible characteristics that exist within a given statement. So it does make it easier using something like Google Forms, where you can go through and categorize each response. But this is why it's also important to figure out what your unit of analysis is. If your unit of analysis is too large, you may end up coding every response as all possible characteristics. So take some time and think about how you want to code these things and what's most important for answering the research question that you are asking.